I think it all comes back down to what we discussed early on is as a parent, what are your expectations? What does it mean to you to be educated, right? Not to be schooled, to be educated. And maybe that requires school, maybe that requires homeschooling, maybe that requires, who knows? But you need to be very clear on your definition of an education and then to work backwards from there and reverse engineer what that looks like for your particular child.
Well, hello and welcome back to Beyond the Schoolhouse. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to my guest, Karim Kuperhause, who has a massive amount of experience working with schools and ed tech companies to create resources that actually move the needle in the schools. We're talking about what families should demand from a learning program. As a homeschool parent myself and with kids in school, I kind of have seen the full spectrum of how education works when the parent is fully in the driver's seat and then partially in the driver's seat. And I'm very, very interested in helping all parents be an active part of the process to curate their own kids' education. And Kareem is the perfect person to help drive this conversation because he was a classroom teacher for 14 years. He's been a board member. He works with ed tech companies. He has an accelerator for ed tech companies who are trying to make products for the schools through higherlearning.com. And anyway, you're going to enjoy this conversation. I enjoy following him all over the internet. So, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with Karim Kuperhause. We are going to be talking about what families should actually demand from learning and from the education opportunities they choose for their kids. So, tell me about just tell me a little bit about you. I mean, I know about you, but tell me about you and what you do and how you serve the education space.
Yeah, it's funny. I often have this line that I start with, and I say I started my sales career as a kindergarten teacher. I came to Montreal to pursue my Bachelor of Education and to become a teacher. The goal at the time was to go teach abroad, but I met my wife and never left. So I became a teacher here in Montreal. I started off as a kindergarten teacher, pretty much taught every grade level up to grade six and back down. When I left teaching, I always knew I wasn't going to be a lifer. So when I left teaching, I was teaching grade two, and it was to go work in edtech. I was hired by an edtech company. It was a US-based company looking to expand into Canada, and they needed somebody in Canada. I already had a sales experience because I had founded my own tutoring centers here in Montreal. I had 3 brick and mortar sites. I ran satellite programs in 32 different schools. And so I had that background, and I transitioned into edtech, and I've been doing that ever since. A few years ago, I founded Higher Learning, which is an edtech accelerator that helps edtech founders who have a solution that moves the needle on student outcomes to distribute their product and their solutions across school districts. And so I have a strong background both in public education, but also in private education, both through my tutoring centers, which were private, but also my children who around, depending on the age level, like went into private school. I had one that went early on into private school, and my older daughter went into private school at the high school level. And then I now sit on the board, one of those private.
Okay. So you've had the teaching experience, the board experience, tutoring, ed
Yeah,
tech. And I was thinking about it this morning. You know how, I mean, AI is dominating the conversation, but ed tech existed before AI,
sure.
right? So,
Yeah.
what is the definition, since it's going to keep coming up? What is the definition of like an ed tech product? I mean, they're in the schools, they're in homeschooling too, but what are we talking about when we're talking about ed tech in general?
Yeah, I would say, the edtech is sort of this umbrella for any solution that automates something in education, right? And so edtech applies both to K-12 and to higher ed, but they are two distinct categories. What we're seeing more and more is these sort of edtech solutions that are what we call AI native, and they're spinning up really quickly. And so because they're AI native, these are solutions that are iterating really quickly and allow edtech founders and whether it's the students or the teachers, whoever the beneficiaries of these solutions are, to really get feedback in quickly to make those products better. But traditionally, ed tech has been all about compliance, right? And so there's ed tech solutions for student information systems, for learning management systems, for HR, for
Okay.
finance, for IEPs. It's a little bit across the board. I would, I always say that maybe 10% of solutions in ed tech actually directly affect student outcomes.
Even still with this, like the way
Yeah,
it's even with
yeah,
AI, most of the ed tech products are more like administratively focused. Is that what you would
correct.
say?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's
Both in the
interesting.
private and public space.
Yeah. Okay. I guess
Yeah.
I'm more familiar with the probably the 10% because as a parent, like those are the ones that I'm
That's
more
what you'd be focused on.
that's
Absolutely.
what I would be focused on
Yeah.
because I would potentially be buying those or using them, or my kids would be using
Hmm.
them when they bring them home from school. So that's a large amount that is, administratively focused. That's a
It,
lot of
it it
problems they're trying to
it
solve.
it really is. I mean, and the average school district, maybe their budget for ed tech is 8%. And so if you think about it, if it's only 10% of that 8%, there's a very small amount of ed tech that is actually being purchased for students specifically. And in our world, it's sort of in the ed tech world, we look at two different categories. There's the B2C, which is what you're talking about,
Right.
right?
Right.
These are parents who want direct access to solutions versus the B2B, which is the school districts making the purchase on behalf
Right.
of their population.
All right. So when I've followed you around the internet, mostly on LinkedIn, but other places, you're like one of the things I enjoy about your commentary is that you're often like really directly challenging like these ed tech companies, the founders, to kind of put really concrete metrics to the outcomes that they are promising, that they're right. Like and that is true for, obviously 90%, helping these schools administratively or whatever. But also, I think parents are probably very interested in, the ed tech. Almost every kid has a Chromebook now, right? So that's where you have the student facing version of this. Like they're using all kinds of solutions to help them learn more, better, faster, or help learn in a way that the teachers can grade easier or whatever. There's some version of this. Like what should parents who are really wanting to engage and help curate their kids' education, whether they're in public school, private school, homeschool, like what metrics should parents be looking for? Because, they're it's not often pitched to the parents the same way it's pitched to districts,
Yes,
right? Like what should
absolutely.
parents be asking their schools or asking their students, or like how should they be trying to engage with what their kids are learning on these ed tech platforms?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I think ultimately you have to be very clear as a parent on what you expect out of an education for your child. You and I were talking a little bit before the podcast started about how, we were very focused as parents on high academics. I've come to learn that this is not a priority for all parents. Not that parents don't want academics, but there are parents out there who say, you know what, the most important thing is I want a child that grows up to be empathetic, honest, caring, a good person, right? And that is the most important. And the academics are important as well, but they come second,
Right.
right? You have other parents that say, no, no, the first thing is academics. They have to have a high GPA. They have to go to college. They have to become a doctor, whatever.
Right.
And so once you're sort of clear as a parent on what your objectives are, then you can sort of start saying, okay, well, because this is what I expect out of an education for my child, this is what I'm going to start looking for in ed tech solutions. Because that parent who's looking for a well-rounded child might lower their standards a little bit for academics because they want something else. And I know that's sort of I'm not obfuscating on the answer here, but it's you need to be clear as a parent on what you're looking for in your child's education. And then when you start looking at solutions, you can then say, oh, okay, well, I put academics as the number one priority. And so when I look at solution, I need to be able to see that when my son or my daughter or my child is using this solution, I'm going to see gains in X number of weeks, X number of months, or I'm going to be able to see some sort of way that tells me that they are improving over time.
Yes. So they kind of need to be like be clear on their own expectations of what they're getting and also be willing to kind of actually look at the data that's on the back end of most of these platforms. Most of them have some kind of metrics that they're better or worse than others as
Yeah.
far, but like, putting your own brain and making a judgment. And I completely agree because even what you said, like the umbrella, like what somebody's working from, like maybe somebody wants high academics, maybe somebody else is more like emotional stability or whatever. And that can change literally in a different season for that child. Like in one
Yes.
season, it might just be like, I want this kid to learn how to read. All the other stuff is awesome, but if they can't read, we have a problem. And
Yes.
then they hit middle school and you're like, I want them to be stable. They're not a rocket scientist right now, but I want them to be okay and to
Yes.
be kind. And then they
Exactly.
hit high school and you might
Yeah.
change and you're like, oh, the next thing's coming. We should focus on academics.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. But the
Yeah.
parent should be kind of driving that through
For
their
sure.
decision making and the conversations they have with whoever is engaging in that learning process. Yeah. I always say that I think it's funny that schools do parent teacher conferences like, I don't know, like 6 weeks into the school year or something. I think it's funny. I think they should do it before the school year starts. They should have one where they sit down with the
Mm-hmm.
parent and they just get to know them for 20 minutes and say like, what's your biggest goal for your kid this year? And find out what's going on in that kid's family. If there's like some craziness going on, that's going to, you know, that kid might need just some emotional stability at
Yeah.
school. But they don't.
I
They like
love
wait
that.
till they're into the school year
Yeah.
and then it's like Johnny's falling behind. He's, struggling in math,
Hmm.
but like the whole conversation would have been different
Had
if
it
the
been right from the get-go. Yeah.
if it
I'm a
had
big
been
believer in
yeah,
strong parent communications
yeah,
ongoing as well. There, not that I want to throw public education, under the bus, but there is a wall, right, between schools and parents, and schools generally don't actually want parents into the schools
yes,
unless it's for community building and things like that. I was very fortunate as a teacher. I had a school principal who was very big on parent engagement and bring parents into the school. We were a inner city school, and she strongly believed that the more parents were involved, the better. And so we had an open door policy. And I took that to heart, partly because of my experience with my own tutoring centers. I had day-to-day contact with parents. Like these parents who would just drop off their kids at the bottom of the building and not come up. It's like, no, no, no. This is not a daycare service. You're paying for this tutoring service. You're going to come up. We're going to have a conversation every single time. And I had that same ethos as a teacher is I would talk to parents on an ongoing basis. I never waited to parent teacher interviews was just like a time to celebrate.
yeah,
It was never an aha moment. It was just a combination of all the
okay.
conversations and everything going on throughout the school year. But I realized that that's the exception and not the rule.
Yeah. Well, and I'm kind of wondering what you think it would look like. Like you said, most, we'll say public schools, but most public schools maybe don't want the parents heavily involved because that's more people to manage or whatever the reasons are. But if a parent is trying to actively be responsible for their kids' education. What do you think it looks like? Like you had a positive experience, you had a positive district that was welcoming to that. And I feel like where I live is as well, they're highly supportive of whatever you choose. And so I have, a good experience here too. But if somebody wasn't, what do you think that would look like for a parent who's like, no, they're my kid. It's my responsibility to curate my kid's education. Public schools, what we've chosen for right now. How can they become involved without also causing problems for the teacher, the district? You know what I mean? Because I think that's what ends up happening is you see a lot of the negativity then.
Yes, it's a fine line, right? And so, I mean, ultimately, it's about open communication. I mean, and that has to start right from the beginning. Of course, a lot of it is going to depend on the policies of that specific school. And so you're going to have to understand how to navigate that. And often what happens too is that the average school principal is in there for only a few years. Same thing for a
Mm,
district superintendent. And so what might work with one administration does not work
mhm.
with the next administration. So again, it's just being able to understand and have open communication lines. And it requires it requires a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to navigate through schools and school systems.
Yeah. I feel like it requires a lot of patience and also trying to put yourself in the administrators or teacher's
Yes.
shoes. I think that's
Yeah.
sort of missing
Yeah.
in like, people when I see them having their very public complaints online, it's like, "This teacher didn't, pay attention to my students' problems exactly," and it's like, "Well, they have 30 of them. I have 9
Yeah.
kids, so I know how hard it is just with
Yeah.
my 9 to,
Yeah.
like, meet their, like, emotional or,
Hmm.
academic or whatever, and if a teacher is, like, responsible for 25 or 30, like, I mean, it's just not even.
Yeah, and it just and that's the part that's usually missing is the context, right? Of
Yes.
why did that behavior happen at that time, or why did the teacher react that certain way, or which is why I'm a big believer in solutions coming back to the sort of the whole ed tech theme that that provide the content because we've sort of equated teachers with deliverers of content, right?
Yes.
The
Yes.
sage on the stage spewing out knowledge to the students. And, we've always talked, even when I was a teacher, about being the guide on the side, but we were never able to do that because we're the ones who had to transmit knowledge, right? But if you can have AI native solutions that more and more are the ones delivering content,
Mhm.
well, that frees up the teacher to work on things like motivation and
Mhm.
building relationships and life skills and how, empathy and collaboration, because it's very hard to do all of that while also trying to deliver algebra 1,
Yes. It is.
right? I mean,
Especially when the
it's
kids are on, like, very diverse
mhm,
academic planes, like, you got the one kid who can't seem to get it no matter how many ways it's explained, and then you got the other kid who had their math done
yeah,
10 minutes into class, and,
yeah.
like, you're supposed and then everybody in between.
Yeah, and everybody in between, right? And often more and more we have non-readers. And so
Yes.
it's extremely challenging. And so, you know, coming back to these some of these buzzwords that are in education, we've had differentiated instruction as a term for decades, right? And the idea behind differentiated instruction is really related to everything we talk about these days around personalized learning, which is every single student should be on their own learning path,
Yes.
which I even back then absolutely agreed with. But the trouble is, or the challenging part as a teacher is, how do you teach the 25 students when each one is on an individual learning path? You can't. And so
Yeah.
you end up grouping them together. The power behind AI and these new ed tech solutions coming into the picture is that these solutions can provide a bespoke learning environment, learning content to 30 different students at the exact same time. And you as a teacher can actually see that on a dashboard or however it's
Yes.
presented without actually having to be the one that delivers the content.
Right. Yeah, I think the part to me that's kind of curious, and maybe you are aware of how they're, like, handling this is I mean, I've used a lot of AI tools with my own kids, but I've also observed that, like and other ed tech things, but I've also observed that sometimes that material just doesn't stick as well.
Hmm.
So if like you have this, you know, this personalized learning through, ed tech tools, which are obviously, more, not necessarily more convenient, but they are more convenient and you can make it more customized. But then if the material's not sticking,
Yeah.
where's the balance there
You're back to
for,
that motivation piece, right?
well,
And
the
so,
motivation piece, but also like, well, like math is my example in my house but it's like this kid was able to do the math here, but because it didn't require him writing it down, it just didn't get it into the neural pathways the same way. And so now was it beneficial? I mean, I still do it. So I think it's beneficial, but like, what is the question, the path, what are people, like, talking about to, like, solve that p part of the equation? Because ed tech is usually, like, they've got a Chromebook or something like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
right?
There's two things going on. One is the knowledge graph. So let's stick with math because it's an example that everybody understands. All subjects are hierarchical by nature, but math is evidently so. And so, for example, in terms of the knowledge graph, you should not be learning division until you've mastered multiplication. and you should not be learning multiplication until you've mastered addition, right? There's a whole hierarchy that happens that, and that's the knowledge graph, right? You build on prior knowledge, working your way up. Along that is something that is now being referred to as the interest graph,
Okay.
right? And so, okay, if you're teaching math and you're using right now everything's about the World Cup, right?
Okay.
FIFA.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, you're going to attract a certain number of students who are like, oh yeah, this is amazing, right? And so you're going to be using math, calculate scores, averages, whatever. There's so many
Yes.
things you can do, right, with statistics in sports. But there's a certain population in the classroom that's going to be like, this is boring. This is not interesting. I don't understand. This is not right. It's just... So that's the interest graph. Well, what's powerful about AI is that you can keep the knowledge graph and make sure that if you think of it sort of like a Jenga tower, right? There are certain things that happen at the foundation, you work your way up, and you don't want any pieces missing because if there are pieces missing along the way, sooner or later that Jenga tower is going
Right.
to
It's gonna
fall.
fall.
And usually when it falls, it's algebra one.
Yes.
That's
Right.
usually
It
when it
does.
falls.
I
Yeah,
can
because there's
attest.
just too many pieces missing by then. And we can have a whole conversation about that because I'm a big believer, and I'll give you just a little aside here. If you're graduating every year in math, grade one, grade two, you're moving on to the next grade with like a 70%.
Yes.
Well, presumably there's 30% of the content you haven't learned. So if you think
Hmm.
of that Jenga tower, 30%, 30%, 30%, 30%, 30%, yeah, by the time you hit algebra one, there's too many blocks missing and it falls. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not good in math. My dad wasn't good in math or my mom wasn't good in math. And that's why I'm not good in math. It's like, no, no, no. It had nothing to do with that. Is you're missing blocks. And
Yes.
you just have to go back and fill those blocks. And all of a sudden you're going to be able to do algebra one. So that's my little bit aside about knowledge. The interest graph says, wait a minute, you're really interested in FIFA, World Cup, or maybe you're interested in one of my daughters she loves to sew. I
One of
mean,
mine does too.
right.
Yes.
She just loves. She's constantly sewing stuff, and it's really amazing. Well, that's math. That is
Yes.
like an
It is.
incredible amount of math happening, and so there's a way to incorporate that, right? And so
Yes.
why shouldn't you be able to have 30 kids learning the exact same thing that they need to learn, but
Yes.
based on their interests?
Yes.
And as a teacher, you can't do that. I mean,
No.
you can do all the project-based learning you want, but you can't have 30 projects going on at the same time.
No.
But AI can.
Yeah. Well, on a computer, but like, I
Yes.
mean, using that example, like
Yeah.
sewing is a very tactile
Yeah.
experience. So I mean, it has, it's like there is a place for engagement, but then there is also the translation problem. Like you got to pull out the tape measure. Like there's for some kids that hands-on piece. Like I'm not in the schools, so I'm like completely curious on the back end of how these programs are working. If they're seeing, I mean, you work with the best of the best. Basically, you're working with the best programs that only drive outcomes through higher learning. Like you're not interested in like all the other ed tech. You're only interested in the best of the best. And are you seeing that that these programs that are pretty much like computer based, if they're interest based, if they've got both of these, they've got the skills and they've got the interests, that they do have retention? Like, are you seeing that?
Absolutely. Right. And I'm not a big fan of using engagement as a proxy for learning, but obviously the engagement's way higher.
Okay. Yes,
Right.
of
But
course.
you're not only seeing the engagement, but you're actually seeing the scores go up.
Okay.
Right. And so you're seeing both things and they go hand in hand, right? I truly do think that the number one issue in education is motivation. If you solve for motivation, you don't have issues with absenteeism. You don't have issues with engagement. Like everything downstream takes care of itself. But how do you motivate kids?
Yes. Right. And sometimes I like as a parent, I've seen the pattern enough times that I'm like, often a kid goes through a season of being unmotivated. And if you know that, then you don't like let your whole plan fall apart
Right.
while they're in that
Yeah.
unmotivated funk. You just kind of
Yeah.
keep, trying to figure it out, trying to
Exactly.
figure out like your
Yeah.
way
Keep
through it.
supporting. Hmm.
Yeah, I call it sink or swim in my
Yeah.
house. I'm like, and I will let you sink, buddy. If there's one, but my kids in private school, if you sink too far, they'll kick you out, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like that,
Hmm.
it's like there needs to be one reason you want to stay there, but I will let you sink. I'm like, I didn't have on your report card. Oh my gosh. Like that, it's like, oh, now you're in the special, like, study hall. Look at that. You can't talk to anybody. And you've got tutors who are checking on you all the time. And I'm like, man, that stinks, but okay, and
Yes.
it's like, what are you going to do about that? And let them like feel the like weight of their own
Yes.
choices.
Decisions.
That's
Yeah.
kind of my method, partly because that's how I have to live. Like, there's too many of them for me to try to micromanage all their success. It has to fall on them. But I agree that motivation is like the number one thing. Trying to unlock that is, I don't know. If somebody could do that, they would be a gazillionaire, right? Like,
I truly think it's the number one role of a teacher is to unlock motivation.
yes,
And interestingly enough, it is not taught at teachers college. There is
yes,
no motivation one-on-one. It's just not a thing. You're taught methodology and psychology and philosophy of education, but there's no how do I motivate students to learn? And it's interesting because you look at coaches like
mm,
in sports or even in music or like instructors, they inherently figure it out,
yes,
right? Whereas teachers, because they're so bogged down with delivering content, never really take the time to truly understand how do I motivate students and
yes,
how do I motivate this child versus that child,
yes.
because we all have different triggers. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you see with your own kids, right? That no one of your children is motivated by the same thing.
Yes, that's why I'm a huge fan of like a completely curated education. It's why I have used like homeschooling, public school, private school, all the like online schools and early college and trade school. I've used it all because if it will trigger their motivation, like my job just got 100%
Infinitely,
easier,
yes, yeah,
right? Like, if even if it's not my favorite thing, like one of my sons plays football and I'm famous for saying, like, I don't really like football. Like, I don't love it. I'm not and he's really good at it. And he's like a lineman, he's a senior, everybody loves him. He's the guy. And I don't agree with all the way coaches do things or whatever, but I have seen the magic of
yes,
the way that coach speaks to my son and the fruit of
yes,
how it motivates him in life. And I'm like, I have had to lay down a lot of personal preferences because I really have seen that that has been good for my son. And I think that there is something about the way we think about education as parents, where there's this like my ideals versus like what is really working for my kid. And I don't necessarily, it kind of has caught me off guard, the things that have worked for my kids. I don't know, maybe you saw that too, that
and it comes back to your original question, right, Sarah? It's like, how do you evaluate products or
yes,
solutions? Well, it's what are you valuing, right?
yeah,
And at the end of the day, what you should be valuing, and this is, I think we're in alignment on this, is the outcome for the student, right? Whatever is best for them, not what we think is best for them
yes,
necessarily, because we might
yeah.
realize, I don't want my child to be a football player, but if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do, right? I mean, like that's what makes them happy, and like who am I to take that dream away? And so obviously when you have that mindset, all of a sudden you start looking at solutions differently because of that specific expectation for that child, which is different from the
Right.
expectations you have from other children.
Yes. And well, I'm not sure how this works in a district, but like, how like sometimes the thing that needs to be learned in a situation, sometimes like a path you've started down doesn't really seem to be working, right? I'm sure
Mhm.
you've
Yeah.
seen this with
Yeah, yeah.
like
Yeah.
solutions districts
Yeah.
have chosen
Hmm.
or what they used in a classroom. I've seen it for sure with my own kids. Like, I'm pretty committed to not changing our school options mid-year. Like, I just
No,
don't have
right.
the bandwidth for it. Like,
Yeah.
we get 3 months in and you don't like it, then we have another lesson that we're going to learn this year, and that's how to
Yeah.
do
It's
hard
just,
things that we don't like to do. We're
yeah.
like, And I think that's another piece of the equation in the education space is that sometimes whatever we've chosen as parents, or even in like whatever circumstances are in a classroom or a district, like the the reframe on it, like the growth mindset is
Hmm.
like potentially the most valuable piece
Absolutely.
of education that can come from like the hard moment that is like this, whether the program isn't working or the teacher can't figure out how to meet all these needs, or you've
Hmm.
got behavior problems, or I don't know. Sometimes as I look back, that's what I think, like, oh, that year wasn't about having like a winning education season because we were not
No.
winning,
Yeah.
but we learned how to
Yeah.
persevere, treat each other kinder, more kindly. I don't know. Like, I don't know how that works in a district because they're always outcome based, but sometimes things don't work before they do, right? Like,
Yeah, it's interesting. They're supposed to be outcomes based, but clearly they're not getting the outcomes that we're expecting, right? Because reading
right.
levels are atrociously low, and so are math. And so it's a challenge because the accountability that is supposed to be there. And I think I was literally commenting on this on LinkedIn earlier today or earlier this week around, well, everything started with high stakes testing. I'm like, well, the reason we had high stakes testing is because there
Yes.
was no accountability.
Yes.
And so we put that in to get accountability. And okay, well, where are we now? Right?
Yes.
There's really nobody being held accountable regardless, even though we know exactly what's happening and how dismal it is.
Right.
Part of the, which is why, part of the higher learning model is we don't engage in long-term partnerships with our edtech founders until they've done pilots. And the
Okay.
purpose of those pilots is exactly what you're talking about is what happens when you drop that solution into a school, into a classroom.
Hmm.
How our students are going to respond, how our teachers going to respond.
Yes.
And okay, when you're given feedback, how quickly are you going to iterate on it and provide feedback? And how, what does that partnership look like in terms of being able to work through the challenges that you're going to be facing,
Yes.
right? Because I can tell you right now, when you drop that solution to a classroom, it's not going to work as expected.
Yes. Yeah.
But I want to see it evolve. I want to see it iterate. I want to see it get better so that by the end of the school year, it's like, oh, yeah, this
Yeah.
works. And
Yes.
you collaborate with the school district, you collaborated with the teachers, you collaborated with the students, and it got better. Now we got something to work with.
Yes.
And you might not have seen the gains that we wanted to see, but we did see the gains. But part of it is because we had to work through some issues, and we were able to do that in collaboration.
Yeah. How many, like when you have an ed tech product, is it usually like tested in one school or more than one school at a time?
We try to test in at least three at a time
Okay.
in different districts and different schools. Part of that is I mean, one is good,
Yeah.
two is better, and three,
Yeah.
and ideally you want even more than that. But a sampling across three different schools, especially if they're in different environments in different states or urban versus rural or inner
Hmm.
city, allows you to sort of look at variables that you might not necessarily consider on the standalone.
Yeah. And the schools that you work with, do they tend to be like more collaborative type schools where
Yeah,
that's just like part of their methodology that they're,
there's a selection process or even a self-selection that happens. Like if you want to be part of the higher learning ecosystem as a school district, you have to be innovative. You have to
yeah.
want to be at the cutting edge
Yes.
of learning. You have to be open to AI.
Hmm.
And so right away, there's a self-selection that happens, those school districts who want to be part of higher learning. And we do our selection as well because we want districts who will be open and provide timely feedback, right? And who will serve as guinea pigs,
Hmm.
for lack
Yeah.
of a better term, and who are open to that. And
Yeah.
if you're not, right, like if there's a resistance right from the get-go, these pilots are not.
Yeah. It's funny because there's a very strong parallel to like the individualized learning that maybe homeschool parents would provide as well, because you see some that are very locked into, just a very formulaic, this is the way I'm going to educate my kids. And I would say there's some fear around an experimental path. But what you're
Yeah,
talking about is experimental, right? A little bit of,
constantly. Yeah,
you're not going to bring in a solution that you don't think is good. But at the same time, it is unrefined. It needs some help and needs some feedback. And I think that there is like, what is the value you have seen just in the mindset of the people that you work with in having this experimental learning mindset? Because there are really good quality solutions that already exist, but like obviously people are trying to solve other problems. So what do you see in the mindset of these people that you work with that's good that could like maybe be transferred, just like parents could have some of that similar mindset when they're trying to navigate their own kids' education? Because clearly you're working with kind of a niche group of people. This is not
Yeah.
all the schools and all the
No.
educators. What mindsets
Yeah.
do they have?
You know, I, I, I I want to use the growth mindset, but it's such an overused
Yeah.
word. I mean, ultimately, the term that we use or the way we like to think about it is co-design,
Okay.
right? And so a lot of ed tech founders see a problem, they think it's a problem, and they go out and solve it because maybe they know one teacher who had this problem, or maybe their
Yes.
spouse was a teacher,
Yes.
or their right. And so they go out and solve it. And it's like, okay, is that a problem that really needed to be solved?
Right.
Because what we're looking at higher learning is scale. Like,
Yes.
it's not enough to solve this for one teacher. You have to be able to solve this for thousands of teachers,
Yes.
hundreds of thousands of students, because otherwise our business model doesn't work. Or like the whole point
Right.
is to scale this. We are a business after all. And so what we're looking for is when we see the potential in this solution, and they've done maybe a few pilots in different schools, so it seems to be some stickiness. What we want to be able to see is when we drop it into these pilots and these are larger pilots that we have in our school network, in our network at higher learning. It's now that you see the solution in the school and you're being provided feedback by the students, by the teachers, by the administrators,
Yeah.
are you pushing back and say they're not using it properly? Or are you saying, oh, wait a second, I thought I had figured this out. I actually didn't figure this out.
Yeah.
They're giving me very valuable feedback.
Yes.
And I need to go back and rethink this because I made assumptions
Yeah.
that had I actually talked to a lot of teachers ahead of time, I would have solved for this right from the get-go,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
It's
And so I
almost like
think there's
they
part
have to have curiosity and be humble at the
at
same
the
time,
same time, yeah. And I
right?
think it's the same thing as a parent, as a teacher. Like part of building a learning pathway for your child or your students, there's some co-design that's happening there.
Yes.
And it comes back again to that knowledge graph versus the interest graph, right? It's you have to be able to marry those two together. And that requires time. It requires conversations. It requires experimentation. It requires taking two steps forward, one step back, right? And admitting that, oh, this does not work. We got to rethink this, right? And and and
Yes.
and that's fine, right? We
Yeah.
talk about making mistakes, and mistakes are learning opportunities, and so we have
Yeah.
to we have to embrace it. And that's what co-design.
Yeah. And I think I don't know. Like, as a parent, I think it's good for my kids to see me have to wrestle with like
Mhm.
decisions I've made. Like, hey, we're going to try this. We've done this many times with like schooling decisions. Like, we're going to try this. I think it's the best choice for this school year or, for what we're doing right now, but I'm not 100% sure. And so we're going to try it. And I want the kids to kind of co design even with me. Like, tell me what you like, what you don't like. And obviously, I'm observing too. And, as the adult in the room, it's my job to kind of figure out what's working and what's not. But like their voice matters too. And so I don't know. I think I've cultivated that over a lot of years, and my own education was designed that way. So that was just how I was taught. We'll just kind of wrap it up this way. Like, what would you say to a parent? I know your business is schools focused, but if you were speaking to a parent who is facing the same dilemma of like, how do you move through your kid's education journey confidently while also knowing that you don't have all the answers? Because I see a lot of anxiety over this, whether like you make the wrong choice, you're going to fail your kid or whatever. Like, how would you encourage parents to think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I, there's reason to feel anxiety, right? I mean, like education is foundational and it will determine in very large part the rest of your life, right? And certainly in terms of career choices, coming back to the whole CTE conversation is if you don't take certain courses, you're going to get locked out of certain careers.
Sure. Yes.
But we are at very different times. 10 years ago, I would have told every student, you need to go to university, you need to get it right. That is not the case anymore.
No.
The more and more I'm realizing that university is not necessarily a career path for most students. Maybe you're going into trades, maybe you're doing something else. There's a lot of opportunities right now, whether you go to university or not. Having said that, I think it all comes back down to what we discussed early on is as a parent, what are your expectations? What does it mean to you to be educated,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Not to be schooled,
Yes.
to be educated.
Hmm.
And maybe that requires school, maybe that requires homeschooling, maybe that requires, who knows? But you
Hmm.
need to be very clear on your definition of an education and then to work backwards from there and reverse engineer what that looks like for your particular child and understanding that just like you did with your own children, that the path may be different from one child to the next.
Yes.
I'm a big believer, we talked about parent teacher interviews. I used to always chuckle when a parent would come in and say, I raised both of my kids the same way. I'm like, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
You might have the same values, right? But they are two different people. They're not
Yes.
robots.
Yeah.
And based on their personality, you had to raise them differently because of their personality and their characters and their right and their choices. And so, you just have to be very clear about what you believe is an education, and then to work backwards from there based on
Yeah.
your child. And I think it's the same for a teacher. I don't think it's really that much different. I think more and more that's going to become possible. It's hard to do with 25 kids in a classroom, but I think more and more it's going to become possible.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea that you're saying you need to be really clear in your head on what the idea of a good education is. Because ultimately, like, you have to have a goal to shoot for. One way or the other, you have to have a goal to shoot for to reverse engineer anything. And sometimes we're shooting for somebody else's definition. And
Yes.
that is where the problem is, where it's like, if we haven't taken the time to get really clear in our own heads about what a good quality education is or what we're actually hoping for our classroom or our own kids or whatever, then we really can't even hit the target because we haven't defined the goal well enough. So, yeah, I love that. That's like, I don't know,
It's
that's
so important. Like
simple.
yeah, it's simple, yeah, but it is quite profound. And my wife and I over the years have had lots of conversations about where do we see our children, right, when they're
Yes.
adults, and it's not a where do we see them in terms of career,
Yes.
because that's what the default most people think. Oh, I picture my child as a doctor or a lawyer, or
Yes.
right.
Right.
It was never that.
Yeah.
It was about of how do we see them as a person,
Yes. Right.
right? Regardless of their career choice. I never cared about what career my kids chose. It was really about the definition of success is really more linked to happiness
Yes.
than it is to some sort of career.
Yeah. And which I think that like that kind of brings it full circle because sometimes people are shooting at just that as their that
Right, as
that
their
they're
goal.
not putting building blocks in place like they're ultimately I think all parents want their kids to be happy, like, I mean, but without providing any kind of framework for that, they're kind of like, what makes my kid happy, like, on any given Tuesday might change, and so if we're shooting for happy in the moment, we're gonna miss the big
Yeah,
goal
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
it's like we need to have the vision, the bigger vision, because 'cause they're 10 or 12 or
Hmm.
14. We as the parents need to cast the vision and kinda hold tight to it when it's not going so well because there'll be moments.
All the line.
Yeah, hold the line. So, all right. Well, Kareem, this was amazing. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. It was
My
really a
pleasure.
pleasure
This
to
was a
talk to
great
you. Thank you for
conversation.
being with me.
Absolutely.